Occam's razor is a belief that the simplest answer is usually the right one, but not always. In the case of a 10-year-old girl who disappeared while running an errand, the police were presented with a confession. Now, had the police accepted that confession, the man would undoubtedly have been convicted, and the wrong man would have been punished for a crime he did not commit. This is Murder of Crows. Kathleen Marie Collman, affectionately known as Katie, was born on the 13th of August 1994 to parents John and Angie Neese. By January of 2005, she was a popular 10-year-old who had many friends in her neighbourhood in Crothersville. She was a 4th grade student at Crothersville Elementary, and she attended the First Baptist Church of Crothersville. On the 25th of January, Angie was making dinner, and John was still at work at a local factory. So when it was noticed that they were out of toilet paper, Angie asked 10-year-old Katie if she could nip to the local dollar store to pick up some more. Now, this was nothing out of the ordinary, because Katie had made this trip many times before. Now, before we get into the horrible aspects of this story, I need to address the toilet paper situation. You may say to me, how can you run out of toilet paper? That's just poor planning. Which is generally true. But when you live with children, all bets are off. I probably go through maybe a roll a week when I'm on my own. But when these guys are with me, my God, I swear they're preparing for a ticker tape parade or something. I do not know what they do with it, because my toilet paper stocks rapidly diminish. And a situation with no toilet paper is an anxiety-inducing situation. You start looking around for alternatives. Dad's comic collection is starting to look surprisingly absorbent. And the family pets are really starting to avoid the area around the bathroom for fear of being used as a poop loofah. So quite clearly, a home needs toilet paper, which is like Madonna, because they both get into the groove. Right, let's leave the dad jokes where they are, and let's consider this young lady who's heading to the dollar store with $1.10 in coins to go and grab the emergency TP. She was happy to make the trip since it would take her near the People's Bank, where she liked to duck in and help herself to one of the lollipops from the bowl that was on the counter. And she loved to go whenever she got the chance. Now, the assistant at the dollar store helped her sort through the coins that she had to find the correct money. So we know that she got to the dollar store, and we know that she bought the toilet paper. So far, so good. But this is where things start to go a bit weird. When she didn't return home quickly, Angie wasn't worried at all at first, because Katie was very well known in town and had lots of friends that lived near the dollar store. So she assumed that Katie must have run into somebody that she knew and was chatting, as she loved to do. When John returned home from work and Katie had still not returned, the parents were starting to get anxious and began calling around locals they knew and retracing the route from their home to the dollar store to see if there was any sign of Katie. There wasn't. By 7:30, Katie was reported missing to the police. And such was the close-knit community of Crothersville that many members of the approximately 1,500 strong population had rallied, and some 150 people were already searching for the 10-year-old. The police added a helicopter and sniffer dogs to the search effort, as well as their own specialist search teams. Now, an Amber Alert was not initially issued, as there was no evidence of an abduction. The dogs eventually picked up on Katie's scent near the railroad tracks, but a neighbour said that Katie had stopped by to let them know that it seemed that their dog was dead near the tracks. And this became the last official sighting in the timeline of Katie's disappearance. Now, a couple of days into the search, why it took this long I do not know, but a couple of days into the search, a witness came forward to say they had seen a girl matching Katie's description in a truck with a skinny white man, described as around 6 foot, with short dark hair and pale skin. The truck was said to be a Ford F-150, with the model looking to be around 15 years old, but the truck appearing very clean and well cared for. And it seemed that Katie did not appear to be in any distress, but this information was enough to trigger the issuing of an Amber Alert. Now, up to this point in Indiana, Amber Alerts had only been issued around 20 times, with the child being found alive every single time. In addition, there had not been a murder in this part of Indiana for over 25 years. So there was plenty of reason for hope that Katie would be found alive. 5 days into the disappearance, that hope was crushed when a body was found in a creek near Cypress Lake, north of Seymour, around 20 miles north of Crothersville. So this creek, which was just a few miles from Katie's home, Katie's hands and feet were tied and she had been sexually assaulted. And her official cause of death was drowning. The entire community was shocked by the discovery and naturally were horrified that such a heinous thing could happen within their small and friendly town. Examination of Katie's body and the surrounding crime scene led to samples being taken from the body and also a cigarette butt being found. So there were things to be tested for DNA. But of course, this would take time. But things were about to get easier for the investigative team. Within a couple of days of the discovery of the poor girl's body, the police received a call from a local high school dropout. 21-year-old Charles Chucky Hickman confessed to the accidental killing of Katie. He said that Katie was abducted with an intention to scare her, after Hickman claimed she had seen evidence of him conducting methamphetamine activity, and he wanted to ensure that she kept quiet. So it seemed that the police had the rapid conclusion to the investigation they had hoped for. But did they? On repeated interrogations following his arrest, it seemed that Hickman's story was inconsistent, and it led to doubt being placed on Hickman's story of Katie accidentally drowning when he was trying to scare her into silence. In addition, he vehemently denied sexually assaulting the little girl. But the police felt that this, along with Hickman claiming that Katie's death was accidental, were Hickman's attempts at minimizing his crime to try to make it more socially acceptable, as we often see during the Reed technique of interrogation. The police categorically denied any attempts to coerce a confession from Hickman, while at a later police news conference, Hickman's own court-appointed attorney, John Plummer III, stated that Hickman had never told the same story twice. The police spent 9 weeks and around $100,000 trying to work out the truth of Hickman's story, which was no doubt clouded by Hickman's drug use. A 9-week period allowed the DNA tests to come back. On screening the DNA database for a match to the samples taken from the crime scene, the police found a match. But that match wasn't Chucky Hickman. The police went on to arrest Anthony Stockelman from nearby Seymour. The 38-year-old father of 2, or 3, depending which report you read, he was the match that the database had provided. And following his arrest, other evidence against Stockelman began to pile up. The cigarette that had been sent for DNA testing was a relatively rare brand called Roger 100s. On canvassing shops between Crothersville and the site where the young girl's body was found to check sales of Roger 100s, led to finding a shop in Seymour that had sold a carton of those particular cigarettes. They were sold to a man who had a Ford F-150, and they were able to trace back and find the license plate. The truck was registered to Stockelman. Now, Stockelman was not from Crothersville, but his mother lived there, and Stockelman just so happened to be visiting her on the day that Katie disappeared. If these facts weren't enough, red carpet fibres that had been found on Katie's body were found to be an exact match to fibres from the carpet found in Stockelman's mother's home. So the case against Stockelman was incredibly strong. But the authorities were keen to avoid the specific details of what happened to Katie being discussed in open court. They felt it would be too traumatic for Katie's parents and would, of course, impact the entire Crothersville community, even more than it already had been. So, from a desire to avoid this, Stockelman was offered a plea deal. They would take the death penalty off the table if Stockelman pled guilty to murder and child molestation. After several delays, he was sentenced in April 2006 to life imprisonment plus 30 years for the molestation. Now, I'm really glad that the molestation aspect of the crime received a separate sentence, as it clearly warrants a sentence in its own right, given the horrific nature of that aspect of the overall crime. Now, after he was sentenced, Stockelman tried to say that he would swap places with Katie if he could. But the judge wasn't having it. Jackson Circuit Court Judge William Vance said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Stockelman. I don't buy it. I heard you say you were sorry, but I heard no remorse." Jackson County Prosecutor Stephen Pearson said he believed Stockelman, who was a former factory worker, got what he deserved, saying, "We as a society are better served when people like him are kept away for the rest of their natural lives." And he added, "I think our streets are a little bit safer." Stockelman was sent to, I never know how to pronounce this, Wabash Valley Correctional Facility in Carlisle, Indiana. At this point, I really do want to commend the police for following the evidence trail, even though they had a confession ready-made and available to them. The DNA pointed them in a different direction, and by following the direction that the DNA was pointing, they were presented with a stack of evidence pointing squarely at Anthony Stockelman. In the initial aftermath of Stockelman's conviction, talk turned to why Chucky Hickman confessed to the crime at all. And in all honesty, there has never been a clear answer as to why he admitted responsibility for Katie's death. What causes someone to confess to a crime, especially murder, when they didn't do it? There are largely two schools of thought. It can be a whole variety of things where they feel like they're getting a lot of attention, or they're delusional. Those are the words of Dr. Stanley Frager, who is a clinical psychologist at the University of Louisville. Then there is, you are taught as a young person in elementary school to trust the policeman. He is your friend. The words there of Frank Mascagni III, a Louisville defense lawyer. Frager said false confessions are a matter of the individual's state of mind, while Mascagni believes they sometimes come as a result of police tactics. Policemen have discussions with my clients before they turn on the audio tape, he said. And I'm always suspicious as to what was said before the tape was turned on. Number one, they're mentally ill, said Frager. There's a number of illnesses that lend themselves to this kind of problem. Very often, drugs can cause it. They can be delusional. It can be attention seeking. If drugs are the drive behind a false confession, incarceration has a way of changing things. When the person starts to detox and the drugs are leaving the body, then more reality starts setting in. Then it becomes a whole different ballpark, Frager said. Hickman's family said that he suffered a brain injury as a child, which in itself is a condition that might cause him to be easily led. Chucky Hickman's lawyer, John Plummer III, said he had no idea why his client made up the entire methamphetamine angle, calling it bizarre. The problem is that my client, his stories to the police and to everybody else have been all over the place. That's the problem investigators had. Is this guy delusional? Is he just dumb? Is he trying to hamper the investigation? Nobody's been able to figure out why he said what he said. While murder charges were dropped against Hickman, he was still arrested on charges relating to a sexual relationship he apparently had with a 13-year-old girl. Now, this is neither the time nor the place to look into whether that particular claim was true. Returning to Stockelman, His punishment was not quite over, despite being incarcerated for Katie's molestation and murder. Unknown to Stockelman, Jared Harris, Katie Collman's cousin, was also being held at the Weibosch facility. Harris managed to get into Stockelman's cell and lay in wait for Stockelman to return to his cell. When he did return, Harris slammed the door before forcibly tattooing Katie's revenge onto his forehead. 2 guards were sacked following the incident, but I reckon they may have thought that it was a price worth paying. So there we have the terrible story of a 10-year-old girl being in the wrong place at the wrong time to cross paths with a cruel, perverted predator. But such was the close-knit nature of the Crothersville community that Katie's murder impacted the entire town, who felt her loss very, very deeply. A little girl with her whole life ahead of her was taken away from a town where she was loved and cherished. This video is dedicated to the memory of Katie, to John and Angie Neath, and to the people of Crothersville, who are still dealing with the loss of one of their own to this very day. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. I'm Steve. This is Samson that you can hear purring, and we'll see you when we see you.
Say that you're ready, but you won't like it. You say that you're ready.